in which we contend with big questions and also sometimes contend with each other on stage. I imagine there may be a little of that tonight, given...
You're more contentious than me, so...
I was actually going to use the word ornery to describe you, but
okay.
Whatever. There will probably be some difference of opinion.
Can my chair be higher? No, I'm just joking.
I'm afraid not.
Okay.
We made it a low chair,
Yeah,
to lower your self-esteem.
I saw The Great Dictator.
The other thing we did, by the way, is, you know, there's a number of spaces here at Union where you can have these events. There's like a social hall next door and so on, but I wanted a space where you would feel at home.
Sure, and big enough, absolutely. And big enough to fit my ego.
Yeah,
okay.
Well, there's that. So anyway, I want to say quickly, the next contentions is December 8th with Francis Fukuyama. We're going to be discussing where history is headed, apocalypse, singularity, something in between. And as tonight, we will touch on philosophical and, at least glancingly, probably on some theological issues. Well, the title of tonight's conversation is Physics, Philosophy, and the New Atheism. That covers a lot of territory. I'm not sure we'll be able to do justice to those three subjects and the interconnections among them. But if there is one conversation partner I could have in hopes of doing justice to them, it would be Lawrence Krauss. As for the physics part, he is, of course, a physicist, cosmologist and theoretical physicist, and more specifically, foundation professor of the School of Earth and Space Exploration at Arizona State University and director of its Origins Project. He's taught at Yale and Case Western. In addition to all of his scientific accomplishments, he's known, I think, justifiably as a superb expositor of science for the layperson. Perhaps as most famously manifest in his best-selling book, The Physics of Star Trek. And if you've read Lawrence, you know it isn't just a matter of clear writing. He also has a gift for the apt metaphor and also a sense of humor, as I've discovered in our previous couple of conversations that we had on my website, Blogging Heads TV. This is our first time talking in person. His other books include...
You're so much more handsome in person, by the way. Sorry, go on.
That's so nice of you.
I just had to say.
And so are you, by the way.
Thank you.
Plus, your shoes are way better than they were on Blogging Heads.
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking down at them a lot when I was doing the... No, anyway, go on.
Yeah, well, that explains it. Other books. A book on Richard Feynman called Quantum Man.
Yes.
A book called Hiding in the Mirror.
Yes.
And I'll get to the other one.
There's 10 of them. You'll never
Are there 10?
remember. Yeah, but it's
I
okay.
won't get to all of them.
You won't.
No, and neither will you.
You're going to get to the new one because you're going to bring up some nonsense associated with it.
This is true.
Okay. Okay.
This will be my focus. He's also done a lot of writing for esteemed periodicals such as the New York Times and so on about physics. So we got the physics part covered. As for the philosophy part, in Lawrence's most recent book, A Universe from Nothing, is that the name of it?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. He dares to tread on the turf of philosophers, and they have not all reacted warmly to that.
In fact, and this is an appropriate group to say that the philosophers have acted much more poorly than the theologians did.
Is that right?
Oh, yes.
Well,
they're much more sensitive. They're much more sensitive.
That just shows you that religion is a good thing, wouldn't you say?
Well, I think theologians are used to being trashed.
That's it. It could also be Christian humility, but you may be right. Anyway, the book, it created some intellectual tension with philosophers. As for the nature of the tension, I think you get a clue from the subtitle. It is Why There Is Something Rather Than Nothing. You may know that this is a long-standing conundrum. Philosophers for centuries have pondered the question of why there's something rather than nothing, haven't come up with an answer. Imagine their chagrin when they go to the bookstore and see Lawrence's book and the subtitle is Why There Is Something Rather Than Nothing, and more humiliatingly still, it's not by a philosopher, it's by a
that was
physicist.
The worst.
So we are going to be talking about that tonight, among other things. Okay, so there's the physics and the philosophy. As for the new atheism part of the title of this conversation, Lawrence has been grouped by some with the new atheists. Of course, the new atheists are these atheists who gained prominence a little more than a decade ago, I guess. People like Sam Harris, the late Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins. And the reason they call them new atheists is, at least in part, because they are particularly militant more so than...
I always wonder, good, now you explained, I never understood what new atheism was.
I will elaborate
I think
further.
it's a derogatory term to make it sound like neocon or something. It has no meaning whatsoever, as far as I can tell,
Well,
except as a derogatory, meaningless term.
Well,
I'm a very proud old atheist.
At the risk of suggesting that you have played a role in tarring them, you recently published a piece in the New Yorker called "All Scientists Should Be Militant Atheists."
Yes, and if one reads it, instead of reading the
I would
title...
never go that far.
I know. I was going to say, well, a lot of people read the title and immediately tweeted, but the point of it was to make sort of tongue-in-cheek, point out that there are two things that are labeled. So I'm called a new atheist, which has no meaning, and a militant atheist, whatever. I don't know if that's someone who throws leaflets or something, and my point was that people are called militant atheists for nothing of the sort. But we'll get there if you want. I don't want to hijack that yet.
We will get everywhere.
Later I'll hijack that conversation.
Everything I've talked about,
Okay.
we will get to.
Okay, we hope. If I don't keep interrupting.
I was not going to say that.
Okay.
I was not going to say that.
I know.
Thank you for pointing out that
Okay, there we
important
go.
truth. I actually was not sure whether you would call yourself a new atheist, and I guess you're a little ambivalent about that. But we will.
A little ambivalent. I don't call myself anything, but I certainly wouldn't label myself by a meaningless label. Go on.
Okay.
Anyway.
Thank you. So this business of a kind of intellectual tension with philosophy that's kind of evident in Lawrence's latest book. You also have seen the work of some other new atheists. So Sam Harris wrote a book called The Moral Landscape, and the subtitle was How Science Can Determine Human Values. And I gather he suggested that what we now think of as ethical philosophy should actually just be a branch of science. And I guess philosophers can be excused, all told, for thinking that the people called new atheists view them with a certain disdain. And as if to remove all doubt about that, Richard Dawkins recently tweeted within the last few weeks, spent the evening with 4 philosophers trying to convince myself we need them.
Well, it showed he was open-minded.
Well, and then he says, surely we can all think clearly anyway, meaning that, without the help of philosophers. Then he says, then I remembered Twitter. So, in other words, he's saying, oh, I forgot. There are these people who need instruction on how to think clearly. There are all these people who criticize me on Twitter. So I guess the good news for philosophers is, although in Dawkins' view they have no valuable role in academia, they can make a living tutoring Twitter users. And there are a lot of Twitter users.
It's a challenge to get ideas in 140 characters.
I know. Well,
I used to think it was a waste of time.
What
but
the
now
challenge is to insult as many people as he insulted here in 140 characters.
Yeah, absolutely.
For me, insulting one person on Twitter is a challenge.
Yeah.
So anyway, these so-called new atheists have acquired, as you might now imagine, a reputation in some circles for a kind of intellectual arrogance. There's actually kind of a technical term for it. It's called scientism, is the allegation. So scientism is kind of failing to have due respect for the bounds of the authority of science, or an overly expansive conception.
Let me make another point. Let me interrupt you one more time.
Oh, sure.
Sure. It won't be the last. But
I'm starting to get that impression.
But yeah, science has no authority. No scientist of any who calls themselves scientists would argue authority is an anathema
there is
to
a
science.
realm.
Authority is an anathema to science.
Well, I think you would agree that the process of science, not individual science, is the most legitimate or reliable source of knowledge about the
It's the
physical
only
world.
source of knowledge.
Well, okay. So
Okay,
I would
let me
call
make
that
that clear.
authority. Being
Okay.
the only source, if somebody told me I was the only source of knowledge, I would feel that I had authority, but whatever.
No. No, because that's, you can question me on it. And try and prove me wrong. You won't, but you can try.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm looking forward to the attempt.
Sorry. The hardest
okay.
introduction you've ever... No, sorry, go on.
It's okay. I just need to go take a nap now.
If I didn't have respect for you, I wouldn't interrupt you.
I really feel the serotonin rising
okay.
as you interrupt more and more often. Thank you for that. So, have I said everything I wanted to say in advance?
God knows.
That is true, probably. I just wanted to say that, philosophers are not the only ones who feel kind of some heat from new atheists. Obviously, theologians do. We're going to be talking more tonight about philosophy than theology, unless you want to get into theology. I'm happy to talk a little
Wherever
about
you want to go.
But I do want to talk about religion eventually, because I do think the so-called new atheists, in appraising the role of religion in society, and of course their evaluation is not a flattering one of the role of religion in society, I do think they're guilty of, at a minimum, some less than rigorous thinking. So we'd like to talk about that. Why don't we start by getting into this new atheism? So you don't like the term, well, here's
No,
what
why don't you stop using it?
why don't we just assume that every time I use it tonight,
You mean something else.
It's in quotes in the title of the...
Yeah, I know it's in quotes,
Yeah.
but it's like...
So imagine me going like this every time I say new atheism, but I'm going to say it so many times that I get tired if I actually
They
did
call
that. So
you a new philosopher. Okay.
So, as for the new what it has come to mean to people, and it is a term in currency, I think, if you ask what's distinctive about the new atheists, I think two things. First of all, it's true militant is too simple a term. They want to proselytize and convince other people to be atheists and convince religious people not to be religious. And that does distinguish them from at least many atheists in the past.
No, again, you see, that's not true. I mean,
They don't?
what they want to do is convince people to think for themselves, that's all. And I think that's
Well, okay, but
and
they're unanimous in thinking that thinking for yourself will lead you to be an atheist if you think clearly.
will lead you to question religion, absolutely. Or that religion should be questioned like anything else.
They do believe that, yes.
And not believe it, it's a fact. Yeah, so, you know, once again, I just think religion should be questioned like anything else. There's nothing sacred.
You do.
And so, but then people label me as a new atheist, and so I don't, I was actually having lunch with my late friend Christopher Hitchens' wife, and she was pointing out that, you know, there's nothing new about atheism. There's new gods invented all the time, but atheism has been around forever.
No, there is something new. There is something that distinguishes the new atheist from some other atheists.
Yeah, I mean, the point is they're more vocal. They maybe reach a broader audience.
Okay, that's a difference.
Yeah, but, well...
So you just said there's nothing new. That's new. If it's a difference, it's new.
Well, I don't know.
But that's not the only thing.
I'm not even sure that's true.
So that's not the only thing. Related to their desire to kind of, what I would call proselytize and convert people.
What does proselytize mean?
It means go out and spread the gospel, as opposed to just
There's
not
no
talking
gospel.
about
I mean, when I was on stage with...
Lawrence,
Hold on. I was with Richard in Australia, and these people said to me, how do you get people to follow you? And I don't want people to follow me.
Lawrence, if you're going to, like, every time I use a term...
Well, I thought philosophers were precise.
In an other than literal fashion, if you know, like gospel, everyone knowing that I'm using it ironically, because atheists are not really religious, so it's kind of ironic. No. If you're going to, like, you know, every time I do, we're literally going to get nowhere.
Well, I think it's important to, you have some reputation as a thinker, and so it's important that to me that...
I'm warming up to you, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. It's important to me that people like you don't unknowingly misrepresent things, because other people might not think as deeply as you about these things, and therefore they might think the word proselytize means that we're proselytizing.
In the sense of, right, they might think that, and I think they might be right. But in any event, let me add one other feature. I think the reason, there is certainly a contrast with atheists who traditionally have just kind of thought, you know, peaceful coexistence, I don't believe in God, but whatever. That's not their attitude. And I think the reason, the expressed reason it's not their attitude, is that they think religion is a bad thing, an inherently bad thing.
On the whole, I think they think the... Well,
the subtitle of Chris Hitchens' book was How Religion Poisons Everything.
Absolutely.
I'd call that a negative appraisal.
Christopher, definitely. But the point is there's a spectrum. But yeah, Christopher certainly... And I would generally tend to agree with that. But yeah, so I think that's true. I think what's really a bad thing is treating religion different than anything else. That's, to me, that's why religion poisons everything, because it insists on some special place in the human condition. And that inherently makes it a bad thing.
Okay, but that's not, when we talk about people like Harris and Dawkins and Hitchens, that's not the extent of their belief that it's a negative thing. Their belief is more elaborate than that. They just
but you just put me in a whole
fine.
pool of people.
I'm agnostic as to whether you're a new atheist or not, but you seem to have a certain amount in common with these people. And I'll ask you...
I do think on the whole religion poisons everything, yeah. Okay.
Everything.
On the whole.
Okay.
I mean, you know, that's a... that you could tweet that, and therefore it's too simplistic.
So during the Civil Rights Movement, when Martin Luther King felt inspired by religion...
We had that discussion just today with that young man who's sitting over there when I was talking. I talked to a Columbia atheist group because they heard I was coming to see you, so they figured they'd piggyback. And absolutely, we're talking about why atheism might not be so prevalent among minorities. And one of the reasons is that historically in this country, certainly the movement against racism in this country was the institution of the church played a key role, and Martin Luther King is a good example. And so therefore, as a means of socially organizing against oppression, in recent times, the church has played a role. Of course, it played exactly the opposite role in earlier times in American history, where it was used to justify slavery. But in any case, it certainly, in the African-American community, played a key role during the 60s, civil rights, in helping organize. Absolutely.
Well, there were also religious people involved in the abolition movement. But
yeah, of course, of course.
This is just my general point, is that you can find lots of good things associated with religion, done in the name of religion. You can find lots of bad things done in the name of religion.
You asked me on the whole.
People who right. But I mean, have you done the inventory? Have you made a serious effort to look at all the things that are done every day in the name of religion? And really
no, it's not important enough to do that. I have other more important things to do. But on the whole,
but you feel entitled to opine.
Well, what I do, what I do, and boy, this is getting a lot. I'm sorry, I started on. I got you really.
No.
But no. But here's the point. As I have become known and labeled by writing a book which simply asks the question, could you create a universe without God? Suddenly I'm a militant atheist because I asked the question. So then I come to see much more intimately. I become much more sympathetic with people like Richard Dawkins, in fact, because I come to see how you're labeled in a certain way just for raising questions. And then I come to see more deeply, as people write to me, the pervasively immoral nature of most religion in this country. It's become clearer and clearer to me as I go around that on the whole, it not only closes minds, it makes people. I get letters every day that I never got before, and those letters are from kids around the world, and also from people in small towns who tell me, and I'm just so happy I saw this, or I saw The Unbelievers, or I read your book, because I realized I'm not a bad person for asking these questions. I'm not evil. And that is, to me, something I really hadn't appreciated before, that religion has usurped this notion of morality, so that if you just saying, I don't buy it, automatically is equivalent to the saying, I'm not a good person. And that, to me, is the underlying most immoral aspect of religion. It tries to have a monopoly on morality and ethics, and it certainly shouldn't. But I mean, there's lots of studies that show it does. I don't know if in The Unbelievers, but I certainly, of a study recently by a bunch of psychologists of students and adults in the United States and Canada that asked the question, who do you trust? And atheist, the word atheist, the lowest, on par with rapists. Okay? And that's just the way it is. And people were asked, what would be the characteristics that would most likely cause you not to vote for someone? Atheism. Infidelity, lying, financial impropriety, all of that was above being an atheist. So that, to me, because anything that suppresses open questioning is evil. And on average, apparently, the effect of religion having become ingrained in an institutional way in our society as being the owner of morality is evil. Now, I would say the same thing if right now, if it was anything else that claimed to be the owner of morality. People should think for themselves, and thinking for themselves is not evil. So that's what I'm not talking about I'm not saying whether ISIS cuts people's heads off or whether it causes people to hate gays for absolutely no reason. What it does is it makes people feel guilty for thinking for themselves, and I can attest to that from just the vast and every single day. I'm amazed at that, and I hadn't appreciated that as an evil before I actually started getting labeled and people wrote to me.
I wouldn't say, I think you're overgeneralizing
more
than a little. I don't think it's inherent. First of all, we all, you and I both at least, favor people thinking for themselves. You're actually at a theological seminary full of people who are in some sense religious, who I think share that basic value. The fact that I'm here is testament to the fact that there are no litmus tests for actual conventional religious belief here.
Yeah, but there's, as you point out, there's a difference between theology and religion.
Gay rights as if religious people are inherently reactionary. Well, I don't think you'll find a single person in any way affiliated with Union
Did you hear me say people? I'm talking about
religion. Gay rights.
Never said people. I'm talking about religion. Religion means an institutionalized framework in our society.
Right.
Okay, and so, and Richard has emphasized this. He doesn't want to make fun of people. He wants to make fun of ideas. And that's and that's important. So ridiculing religion is different than ridiculing religious people, because most people, first of all, including yourself in some ways, but most people, and you don't call yourself religious, but most people that call themselves religious aren't really religious in the sense that they accept the tenets of a specific religion. Most people who call themselves Christian don't buy into most of the garbage, the nonsense of the Christian. In fact, I've been on stage with people from the Vatican. I try to get them, do you believe in the virgin birth? Do you believe in the... They won't say, because they're also scientists, and they know it's kind of ridiculous. And so what they do, and in fact, Richard did this study, his foundation did this study in England, of people who checked on the census, they're Christian. So 55% of people, which was the lowest number in history in England, the last census said they were Christian. So they did a further study, and they questioned people who claimed the Christian box. They said, do you believe in the virgin birth? Do you believe in transubstantiation? Do you believe in this? No. Why do you call yourself Christian? Because I like to think of myself as a good person. And I think most people call themselves Christians because they think if they don't, they'll be labeled as bad people. I think that the majority of people who call themselves Christians in this country wouldn't satisfy the Pope's definition of what a Christian is. And that includes this Pope.
You mentioned that Richard Dawkins doesn't like to ridicule individuals. Maybe this isn't ridiculing individuals, but when he tweets, all the world's Muslims have fewer Nobel Prizes than Trinity College, Cambridge.
That's great. You know, actually it's funny because the interesting thing is that if we talk about Universe from Nothing, it's interesting, there's only one that I know of particularly bad review of my book, and what it did was it criticized the afterword of my book, which was written by Richard Dawkins. So I'm always amazed when I get criticized for things Richard says, but Richard says some silly things.
You criticized the afterword you wrote for your book?
No, there was a review that basically focused on the afterword.
Well, let's talk about your book and then get back to religion per se. So tell me...
But Richard, you know, I think he provokes, and it's important. I think
that's productive? You think to insult all the world's Muslims is productive? It's making the world better and safer?
I think it can cause some people to think. I think it takes all types, 1,000 points of light, if you wish.
So you think that's...
No, I think it takes people like Richard. I'm a little funnier than Richard, so maybe that's a good thing. But I do think, look, someone was talking to me about an event I did in London where I debated an atheist, and I also required the room to be unsegregated because it was segregated by men and women. And it was a university, so I refused to speak if it was. And I said some things which would be considered offensive, but I did it to provoke thought. For example, the questioner was making the ridiculous statement that Islam encourages critical thinking. And it was a characteristic of the faith. So I said, really? So you know, any question is okay? He said, yes. I said, okay. Is it okay to ask if Muhammad was a pedophile? Okay. Now that, I'm happy. I was worried that I would be, in certain places in the world where I would be killed immediately for that statement. And I was worried about it right there in London. But I knew that was an offensive statement to make. But what I was trying to do was to get people, it seems to me what you need to do is get all teaching of any sort, as a teacher, is to get people to confront their own misconceptions. So sometimes you say something that may seem as if it's offensive to get people to think about their own worldview. And that may be offensive, but also, as I told the kids today, Stephen Fry, offense is owned by the person who's offended. And so Stephen Fry, who's another new atheist.
Yeah, but people are offended, and we all, even you, refrain from saying things sometimes that will offend people.
Yeah, but the point is you decide how to respond. And so you can decide whether you're going to cut my head
I
off.
do not
or whether you're going to
insult ethnic groups.
No,
but let me finish.
Yeah, okay.
There are plenty of ethnic groups who are
It's not ethnic, it's a religion.
That's letting me finish.
Okay, but...
Sociologists define religions as ethnic groups, okay? As included in the term ethnic group.
So Christianity is an ethnic group?
That is a common sociological view,
well,
yes. I'm sorry to inform you.
That's a problem with sociology.
Well, I know that the new atheists in general, not that you're one of them, in making their various pronouncements and generalizations about religion, show no respect for the subtlety of inquiry that social scientists realize you have to exercise to say meaningful things about social phenomena. I'm aware of that.
So hold on, that's subtle? No, it's subtle to say that Christianity isn't an ethnic group, that it spans...
I'm just saying that's their definition. We're wasting time. It's just a waste of time.
Well, okay, but that's what religion, philosophy... Anyway, it doesn't matter. Okay. Okay, sorry. Calm down.
My point is, there are plenty of ethnic groups, religious, racial, plenty of other groups, demographic, gender, whatever, who are underrepresented in winning Nobel Prizes. And I think it's safe to say that some of them, Richard Dawkins would not say this about. I don't see the point of saying it about any of them, but it's certainly the case that the new atheists have gotten a reputation for being kind of anti-Muslim. And I just want to say, you know, Sam Harris says things and so on.
Well, Sam's been very vocal about it. Yes. Richard a little bit.
And I think it's unproductive. It's maybe worse than unproductive to be gratuitously offensive in this way.
I agree with you generally. To be gratuitously offensive is, well, it's often unproductive, but sometimes it serves a role of, sometimes you look, as I've often said as a teacher, if you want, the biggest mistake any teacher makes is to assume their students are interested in what they have to say. Okay, because then you've lost them. What you have to do, and you as a teacher, you probably learned that a lot. So,
learned it this week.
And so what you have to do is you have to say, what are they interested in? And let me go to them and talk in terms of things that they're interested in so that they can be interested in what I have to say. But it's not true. It's true for car salesmen, radio hosts, writers, everyone. But so that's one way to reach people. But another way to reach people is to say something that appears so offensive that it causes people to, well, there are two reactions you can have. You can just be disgusted, or you can say, how could someone say that? Or, you know, that's an interesting statement, but it really offends me, so let me think of why it offends me. So I can understand doing it. I don't think it's not my style as a matter of practice, but I certainly think it's one way of raising the issue. For example, let me give you an example of something I said that's offensive to some people. I said, on the whole, teaching religion to children is child abuse. Okay, some people were offended by that statement, and we can go into why I said that statement. But then they point out, well, why did you say that? I said, well, if I hadn't said that, you wouldn't even know you wouldn't have heard what I was talking about before. It raised the profile of that discussion I was having because I said something provocative. Now, that provocative thing, provocation and offense are slightly different, but I'm sure every time I say something provocative, I also say something offensive to some people. Okay. That's their problem.
Speaking of putting things in a provocative way that succeeds in getting attention, there are people who have, you mentioned, we wanted to get your book, your latest book. There are people who have said that the subtitle, Why There's Something Rather Than Nothing, is false advertising. So let's get into that discussion. Well, first of all, let me try to pithily summarize what I think is part of your argument, and then you can correct me if I've got it wrong, which I may well. But part of your argument is this idea that I gather there are these things called, well, first of all, there are these things called fields in physics, electromagnetic field, but there are also these things called quantum fields, relativistic quantum fields, and these quantum fields can assume various states, and the states kind of correspond to, in a certain sense, kind of how many, or particles, In other words, I guess talking about fields is in a way seen as a more fundamental way of talking about what is sometimes talked about as particles. Anyway, there is something called a vacuum state that a quantum field can assume, which corresponds to like 0 particles.
You make it much more complicated than it has to be.
Okay, but let me finish, and I think it's intelligible, and if it's wrong, you can tell me.
It's wrong.
Okay, good. And the idea is that these quantum states are unstable, so they tend to, or sometimes transition to other states that correspond to actual kind of particles. Okay? And that is, and you see something like that as explaining the long-standing question of why there's something rather than nothing.
Okay, well, no, so that's, first, as I made it pretty clear, I thought in the introduction of my book, that the first thing about the question, why is there something rather than nothing, is it's not a good question. Like many philosophical and religious questions. It's just not a good question. Every why question presumes purpose. Whenever we say why, we really mean how. So I put that question in there to provoke, to say, what does this question really mean? Why is there something rather than nothing? Well, if you think there's a reason, then there's a purpose. But then what if there isn't any purpose? So when you ask, why does the heart pump? You don't really why. You mean, how does it pump? Why do we have 2 legs? You don't really mean that.
There is a why answer in that case because it's functional. So you can say, you know.
No, it's eventually how, right? No, because the how wasn't created with a purpose. It has a function.
Natural selection does.
So you ask, how does the part cause people to cause blood to be circulated and cause the body to be oxygenated? Ultimately, all why questions are how questions. As I point out, the why questions are, you know, your kids always ask why, and eventually you say, because, go to bed. And so I phrase that question first to point out that, you know, sometimes questions may be bad questions. In particular, what science really does, and this is what really offended some people, is cause us to redefine the meaning of certain words. But that is, in fact, called learning. Okay? And so science may say, you know, this concept which we thought was reasonable may not be reasonable. Take, for example, causality, which is a certainly reasonable concept, and the foundation of modern physics. Well, people often ask me, what came before the Big Bang? Well, the answer may be, it may not be a good question, because, as I'll get to, space and time could have popped into existence, because space and time are tied together by general relativity, okay? They're inextricably tied together. So if you create space, you create time. So it could be that if our space was created by, say, quantum fluctuation or something like that, that there was no time before. So the question, what was before, is just not a good question. Now that means we can't use traditional techniques of even physics to try and address it. We may have to change our ideas of what are good questions. Just like quantum mechanics has caused us to change our ideas of what separation means, what distinct means. You know, things here and things there, if they're entangled in the classical world, are separate objects, and if I affect something here and instantaneously affect something there, it appears as if something happens faster in light. In quantum mechanics, that's not true. So we have to change our concepts. We have to be very careful. One of the points of my book was, what is nothing? So when you say, why is there something rather than nothing, you have to define what you mean by something and nothing. And as you pointed out clearly, that means understanding from a physical perspective what those concepts are. And the thing that I tried to say, which also appeared to offend some people, is that nothing is a physical concept. It's not a philosophical one. Namely, if nothing is the opposite of something, if that's really true, if nothing is the opposite of something, which maybe you could argue isn't the case, but let's accept for the moment that's the case, then something is clearly a physical concept. So we really, in order to understand what nothing is, which is the absence of something, we better understand what something is. And that means we've got to do science. And so I tried to lead people through that. Now, it is true, what I pointed out is there's 3 kinds of nothing. I mean, the interesting thing to me is people who say, why is there something rather than nothing? And who object
I'm going to ask you to cut to the chase pretty quickly.
Okay, I will. Well, it depends if you want me to actually explain what I'm talking about. But no, but hold on. So the nothing. So when you ask the question, what is something? Why is there something rather than nothing? You have to find what nothing is. And I would argue most people, specifically when I think of the theological basis of that question, don't actually define what they mean by nothing. They mean the Bible as often defines nothing as this vast empty space, which I point out is certainly unstable. But I said that's a simple kind of nothing. And then you talk about quantum fields. Well, that's another kind of nothing. But my point was...
But that's not a kind of nothing. And let's focus on this because that's the criticism. No, let's get there. Let's
the
get
criticism
there. I know why
people,
you don't want to go there.
No, no.
Let's get there.
Yeah, let's get there. No, I really want to get there because... Hold on. You haven't let me get to the real nothing.
You just talk for 5 minutes. Give me a break.
No, no, the real nothing is nothing.
They're going to leave without knowing what the critique of your book is if you continue to filibuster.
Let me say what I said, and then you can critique it.
Okay, if you'll let me critique it.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. The final and most important thing is, the kind of nothing I'm talking about is no space, no time. Everything we see, everything we experience did not exist. The space in which we live, the particles in that space, the time in which we live did not exist. Then it began to exist. Now, whether you like calling that nothing or not is a semantic question that doesn't interest me. The point I was trying to address is how can you get a universe full of 100 billion stars in each of 100 billion galaxies from absolutely nothing, no space, no time, no particles. Now, whether you decide that the absence of everything we see, including the space in which we exist, is nothing, is something I personally don't care about.
Okay, but that is, and will you give me several minutes? Seriously?
Yeah, you can talk as long as you want.
Thank you. But that is, the question you're now dismissing as uninteresting to you is the question you actually purported to address in the book. In the beginning of the book, you say, for centuries, theologians and philosophers have wrangled with this question, why is there something rather than nothing? I think we can shed light on that. So I perhaps naively assumed, when you referred to the question that philosophers and theologians have wrestled with, that you were talking about the question that theologians and philosophers have actually wrestled with. They are interested in the question of how something in the sense of physical laws, physical stuff, space-time, whatever, came out of nothing, nothing, nothing.
What do you mean?
And the problem, which has been...
Define nothing.
Well, it means, for one thing, the absence of physical law.
Great. I said that's a possibility. Our laws may come...
It's a possibility, but what you actually purport to be able to show through physics...
I didn't claim to show any of it. I just said it's plausible.
What you showed is that something that can kind of be called nothing can generate something. But let me finish. The thing that you say is kind of like nothing. Actually, you're assuming the existence of physical laws at that point.
No.
And well, how does a quantum field get to something without some sort of physical law?
There's no quantum field because there was nothing, and there was no quantum fields existing before our universe existed.
I think we're conflating two parts of your argument, maybe. There is and you know, you and I had this discussion on Blogging Heads, and you were saying at that point, well, in the beginning there was law, and I was saying, well, no, that's not going to satisfy a theologian. They want to know how before there was law, or a philosopher, before there was law.
What if before isn't a good question?
Let me finish.
Okay.
I said, that's not going to satisfy them. They want to know how it is that before there was law, okay? That's what they mean by nothing. Before there was law, and you said, well, at that point you said, well, that's not what I mean. Now,
no, I did say, in fact, if you read my book, first of all, my role is not to satisfy theologians or, you know, because...
No, but if you purport to address the question they're asking, now let me finish. You said you let me finish.
Even I described having no physical law whatsoever.
So after the conversation I had with you on Blogging Heads, where I said, but wait, you're starting with a law? That's not good enough for the philosophers. Then the review of your book appeared in the New York Times Book Review by David Albert, philosopher.
It wasn't a review of my book. It was a review of a book he wished I'd written. Yeah,
well,
go on.
He, unlike me, is a philosopher of physics.
Yeah.
And he pointed out that you weren't just assuming the existence of law, but that any quantum field, even one that's described as a vacuum, is a physical phenomenon. So
yeah, but he obviously hadn't read the book. Because I didn't talk about it. I mean, that was one part of it.
You didn't talk about quantum fields.
He didn't review anything I actually said in the book.
What is the argument?
I would have given it a C+ if I was an English professor.
So what is the argument he missed as to how, well, I don't think we have to go there because you've already said
if space and time don't exist, there are no quantum fields.
And there are no laws.
And I even said, in every different universe in a multiverse, the physical laws can be different. If there are an infinite number of physical laws, there are no laws at all.
Are you talking about a time when there are no laws?
Or every law. I don't think of it as a different. If anything goes, then there are no laws.
Well, anyway, what philosophers mean is no laws, nothing that's in any sense physical stuff. Are you showing us how you get from there to here?
Yeah.
Do you purport to show
yeah,
us that?
yeah. In the sense, let me try and walk you through an example. So look at that light. Okay, so you can see the light because there are photons coming from that light, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. But the photons didn't exist. They weren't sitting in the atom before they were emitted, when the electrons changed energy levels. They didn't exist at all. They didn't exist. Those photons weren't there. Suddenly they exist.
Right.
Now, that doesn't bother you. A photon from nothing doesn't bother you. But what I'm telling you is that you can get a universe from nothing, and that bothers you. What?
No,
No, there was no photons. Hold on. The absence of photons is no photons. I call that nothing. In photon land, there are no photons, and then there's suddenly photons. So the absence of photons, I would call nothing. Now, so if I suddenly have photons come into exist from no photons, it's a really amazing thing. And I guess when I say I'm providing insight into the issue, I don't say I solve the question. I say science changes our thinking and causes us to rethink some of those fundamental questions, like why is there something rather than nothing, and realize that maybe that's not such a good question, because the distinction between something and nothing in science is not so great. And in fact, in certain kinds of science, including quantum field theory, nothing, which means no particles, no radiation, is completely indistinguishable from a state with lots of particles and lots of radiation. But it's even more, because if you make space and time dynamical, then universes can come where there were no universes before. Now, if something existed outside those universes, that is an interesting question, and it's a turtles on turtles question. You can ask, and we don't have an answer to this, you can say, did our universe come into existence spontaneously when there was really nothing, no space, no time, and nothing else existing elsewhere? Or did it come into existence in the midst of a multiverse in which other things may have already pre-existed, and may have pre-existed for an eternal time? Those are interesting questions, but it adds you'll forgive me, but I think the real philosophical and theological question is that makes it appear as if you need a divinity, that seems to violate the laws of physics, is how can you have all this stuff if there wasn't stuff in the first place? And the thing I wanted to celebrate was that you can get all this stuff from no stuff without any supernatural shenanigans, and that to me is amazing. And that's the question I wanted to address.
But you did not show how you get there from nothingness in the sense that philosophers have always meant the term. And that's why you started out rightly by saying,
I don't care what philosophers always mean the term. I defined what I meant by nothing. Fine. I define my terms. They don't.
Didn't mean what they've always meant.
I don't define in terms of what they mean. I defined what I wrote a book. Right. Why is there something rather than nothing?
There is a sense of the word nothing as defined by you, in which you have shown how something can arise. It's just not the sense that philosophers have always meant.
Fine.
Which is fine. Okay, so we agree on that.
Yeah, I don't know what philosophers are. I would claim I've yet to meet a philosopher who's defined what they've always meant.
Well, they definitely...
No, when it comes to nothing, I define at least my terms. No one's ever countered me. You know what they define nothing as? That from which only God can create something.
No, well, that's, philosophers don't.
Not theologians. Philosophers then, what philosophers do is define things in terms of other things, but classical concepts go out the window. Before may not mean anything. The term before the Big Bang, what it came from. In fact, why is there something rather than nothing may really be a bad question, because it implies a causal process that may not have existed. And we have to accept that these possibilities can arise, and that physics tells us they can arise, and realize that it may change the meaning of the question, and the question may not be a productive question. But it may not satisfy philosophers, but to say that's not a productive question, but that wasn't my intent. My intent was neither to satisfy them or upset them.
You actually do start off the book purporting to address that question, but whatever.
Yeah, I think I do.
The thing I think to understand about this question and purporting to answer it is that the question as asked is imponderable. And that's kind of what it was famous for.
What is imponderable?
It's not like philosophers really thought that we were going to find out, because it's an inherently unanswerable question for the following reason. It's like, if you say, why is there something rather than nothing, and by nothing you mean no physical laws, whatever, the only kind of answer that's intelligible to the human mind that somebody can provide does involve asserting some kind of being or physical system or law. So you have your version of that. They may say it's God, whoever, but whatever anybody says, if they say this is what turned nothing into something, the answer is, well, where did this thing come from? And so it's
I
in
didn't
the
say there's
structure
anything
of the
eternal.
question that it can't,
That's the point,
that it
is you
can't be
assume
answered satisfactorily.
agency. To assume agency is wrong. In quantum mechanics,
Right.
things just happen.
Sure.
There's no agency. There's no reason. There's no reason why that electron